This game was provided to Crits Happen by Dragon's Lair Comics and Fantasy. Check them out online at dlair.net for all your comic and gaming needs.
Hi everyone, it's Tox from critshappen.com. Thanks for watching and welcome back. We have another critical review, this time of a game called Bruges from Z-Man Games, which is designed by Stefan Feld. Now this is for 2 to 4 players, ages 13 and up, and plays in about 60 minutes. The concept is very simple. We're in 15th century Belgium in the beautiful city of Bruges, which is about to become the epicenter of trade and commerce in Europe. It's our job to build channels and houses, recruit people and gain abilities and advantages from them, and gain reputation inside of the city's politics. The ultimate goal? Get the most victory points and be declared the winner when the game is over. But as you can imagine, if you're familiar with other such Stefan Feld titles like Castles of Burgundy, the simple is not always so simple when there's multiple choices laid out in front of you. So come with me and let's jump into 15th century Belgium, float down the channels of this beautiful city, and check out Bruges. Alright everyone, we have Bruges laid out in front of us. There's quite a bit to this, but let's run through it as quickly as we can. So the board is not too much interacted with. There's going to be 5 dice that we're going to roll and put on these 5 spaces at the beginning of our turns. There's 2 meeples that represent our reputation track advancement. So as we move up the reputation track, we'll use these guys to move up. There's a scoring board around the outside that we each start on the number 5 and move up or possibly down from there as well. And then there are canals. Now, this is a 2 to 4 player game, and the idea is that I'm going to be red, so my canals start here and work their way out. Mrs. Tox is going to be blue, and her canals start here and work their way out as well. If we were playing with 3 or 4 players, they would have their spaces starting over here on the left and the top right and the top left as well. We have a little marker here to represent our colors to show where our canals start, and then a marker on the side to just remind us which colors we are as well. And while each player could play blue, red, or yellow, or anything like that, these dice don't correspond to the colors of players. We'll talk to you a little bit more about what they correspond to as we play through the game. Now, in addition, to start off the game, each player is given a reference card that has the threat descriptions on one side and the round phases on the other. More about the threats in a second as well. We're given 5 money, and we're given 3 different reputation, or excuse me, 3 different majority markers that could be flipped over at certain points in the game when one of us has the majority in either reputation, canals, or actual people that have been put out into play for them. In addition, there's threat markers down here, and more importantly, there's 3 different decks of cards. And the cards are going to constitute multiple different things throughout the game. The first thing is good to know is how to set these cards up. All of these cards are shuffled and then placed into 5 equal stacks. Then depending on the number of players in the game, you're going to take you're going to take stacks equal to the number of players. So in our case, we took 2 stacks, shuffled those together, and separated them equally into 2 different draw piles. All of the remaining cards, which you can see in a 2-player game is massive, are left for overflow. When we are told to draw cards in the game, we're going to get to choose between either one of these stacks. Now the good thing to note that's important is on one side are houses, and the houses are all worth 1 victory point at the end of the game, and there's a banner across the top that says Bruges, and each house is a different color. The color will correspond to the back of the front of the card and the color of the character of that card. So in this case, this is a dancer. It's a purple banner card, which let me know that because there's a purple banner on the back. That comes into some strategic gameplay later on. But essentially the characters comprise 2 different things. The right banner are all of the actions that you can take with that card. The left side with the character, the cost, the victory points, and the ability of the character are all after they have been played into a house. So as these cards come into our hand, we're going to be able to discard them to take actions or potentially put them into a built house that we have and start to use them as the character as well. And there's a lot of different actions that we could do, so we'll go ahead and explain those as we go through gameplay. That's the basic setup though. One person is chosen as the start player. We chose Mrs. Tox, and she usually always wins anyway. and we're going to jump in and get started. So the very first thing that we do is we're going to refill our hands to 5 cards. So she's going to go first, and she has to pick from whichever deck she wants whenever she wants. There is a rule that says that you're not allowed to look at the cards while you're choosing them until after you've chosen all 5, but you do get to see that back banner and you know what color the characters are going to be on the back side. At the very beginning of the game, that's not too impactful, but right now we'll see where we go. So I am going to choose my 5 as well, hopefully diversify a little bit, and we'll see how it goes. Now you may have noticed that some of the colors match those dice that are on the board, so we'll see how that goes. Now, the next thing we do is we roll dice. So Mrs. Tox is going to go ahead and roll all 5 dice, hopefully not knocking everything off of the board. All right, and then we arrange them from low to high order. And we do that for specific reasons. Depending on the numbers rolled, you're going to have different things impact the game. For example, the very first thing we're about to do right now is advance up the reputation track. Any 1 or 2 that is rolled is all tallied up, and that's how much money we can spend to move up the reputation track. So for this roll, we have 2 2s for a total of 4, and we could move up 1 space on the reputation track. Mrs. Tox gets the first option to that because she's the first player, and she looks like she's going to do it. All right, so she's moving up. That's a pretty big start, actually, because that's very expensive to move up, and it means that she probably has some way of gaining a lot of money. So that's actually pretty interesting. Most of my characters, unfortunately, cost quite a bit. Oh, you know what we forgot? Everyone gets 1 worker of each color. We totally forgot that. So there's 5 different color workers, 1 for each of the dice. So brown, purple, yellow, red, and blue. So we each get 1 of these, and these guys are going to be used to help us build houses and to help us possibly trigger some of the abilities of the cards that we're going to be playing. And like I said, unfortunately, some of mine are really expensive. So I don't think I'm going to move up the reputation track. Now what that means is right now, Mrs. Tox is already ahead of me there, and she's going to get 1 victory point at the end of the game. If she continues to move up ahead of me and I never outpace her, that is going to be pretty big. And we'll explain that at the end of the round when we get into majorities. So that is done with the reputation track, and now we would get threat markers. Any 5 or 6 that's rolled, we would get a corresponding threat marker of that color. So if, let's say, the purple was a 5 or a 6, we would get 1 purple threat marker. Once you receive 3 of a threat marker of 1 color, then you have to deal with 1 of the 5 threats, which are raid, flood, fire, pest, and intrigue. And as you can imagine, none of them are very good. So thankfully, we don't have any, so we don't have to worry about that either. So now you're allowed to take your first action. In a round, we're going to take different turns. And on your turn, you're allowed to play a card either for one of the actions or play it as a character into your house that already has a house built. In this case, we don't have any houses built, so usually houses are one of the first things that's done.
All right, I'm going to discard this and get 4 money.
Perfect. So she's going to discard the dancer and she's going to get 4 money. One of the actions that you can choose is to discard a card and gain money equal to the color die of the card. So in this case, the dancer's purple. The purple is a 4, so she's going to get her 4 money back. So that was pretty good. All right. The next thing, now it's my turn to take an action as well. So I am going to... let's see here. I am actually going to play a house, and it is a blue house, so I have to give up a blue worker. Now, the reason I can do that is the bottom action of every character is that house symbol. I can spend a matching color worker from my supply to build that house and put it into play. So now I've got 1 victory point at the end of the game as well. Those are not tallied as you go along, they're tallied at the end of the game. All right, your turn.
I am going to build a yellow house.
A yellow house, all right. I am going to put a person into my house. Now, when you put a person into the house, it's good to note, and this is really good for the folks over at the CBJ podcast, that you do not have to match the color of the banner of the person with the color of the banner of the house. Those do not have to match. Not saying that anyone we know and love did that in any games that we played, but it still worked out okay for them. So this guy is the conjurer, and he's going to cost me 3. So I'm going to spend 3 and put him into the blue house that I have here. He is worth 1 victory point at the end of the game, and he lets me spend a yellow worker, and for each entertainer person in my play area, take 2 money. So right now I would get 2 money because he's my only entertainer, but I may or may not have more entertainers in my hand. So we'll see how that goes. Your turn.
I am going to spend 3 and put him in that house. For each scholar person in your play area, take 2 coins.
Ah, very similar. Very good. Very nice. Alrighty. I am going to build another house, and this one's going to be yellow, so I'm going to put a yellow worker back. Now many of you may say, why would you do that when you need yellow workers? Well, you'll see momentarily.
I am going to build a red house.
A red house, okay.
A red house.
Alright. And then for my last action, because we get 4 actions per turn or per round, I am going to discard a yellow card, and I am going to get 2 workers. So it doesn't matter what the name or the character is that you discard. In this case, when you use one of the sidebar actions, it matters the color. And one of the actions at the very top shows 2 workers of that color, so you can discard anyone and get 2 yellows. So now I have 2 yellows, which is good. So that's the end of my turn, the end of your turn. We've each played 4 cards. That's the end of the round. So now we would move on to the next round. Now this is... So this is going to change. We're going to then do verifying the 3 majorities. And this is very important because right now Mrs. Tox is going to get a big boost. So the 3 different majorities are the number of people that are in houses in play, the highest person on the reputation track, and the person who has built the most canals. So no one has built canals, so we don't have any majorities on that. We both each have 1 person, so neither of us have majority on that. However, Mrs. Tox is 1 space higher on the reputation track than I am, so she gets to flip her token over to the colored side. Now, I may eclipse her later in the game, and I may get ahead of her, but all that matters is she held the majority once. And what that means is she gets 4 points for that. So now it's up to me to play catch up to get ahead of her. I can't just tie her, I have to get ahead of her to get that majority. So that's the end of the first round. Let's move on to the second round and see if any additional mechanics come into play here. Go ahead.
Alright, I'm going to play the Gatekeeper, and he's a 0 cost, but he has an immediate ability, and immediately build a canal token for free.
Okay, so that's going to be a big jump for her because that, again, if I don't build a canal token now, she could get the majority for those canals at the end of this round. The canals have costs ranging from 1 to 5 as you build out. So the further you build out, the more expensive they get. In addition, once you hit the midway point, you get 3 victory points. Once you hit the end of either canal, you get to take a statue token. The first person to finish will get a 7-point statue token. The next person will get a 6, a 5, all the way down to a 2. So if Mrs. Tox were to build out this canal all the way to its end and get the 7-point token, and then build this canal out to its end and get the next token, she could get 13 plus an additional 6 for the midway points and get quite a bit of points. However, you have to be able normally to discard the same color card as the canal piece you're about to build. In her case, she got a nice little bonus there being able to build it for free, which is pretty good. Alright, my turn. Let's see what we can do here. I am going to build a purple house, so I will discard a purple worker.
I will discard a brown card and get 4 money.
Alright. And that's part of the action again of discarding a color card to get money equal to the value of the die that is rolled for this turn. Okay, I am going to use an ability. This doesn't count as an action for my turn, but I'm going to use a yellow worker, and I'm going to get 4 money. And I like to tap these just to remind me that I've used these. Whenever you see something that has a worker cost, you can only use it once per round. So I'm going to get 2 money for each entertainer. I have 2 entertainers, so I'm going to go ahead and get 4 money. And then as an action, I'm going to go ahead and build someone and recruit someone into this house called the Draper. The Draper is going to cost me 3, so I'm going to put 3 back. He's worth 1 victory point at the end of the game, and he has the same type of effect the Rope Dancer does, which is always looking for something to happen. In this case, it says whenever you do the red money action with the red die, take an extra 3 money. So if I were to discard a red card to get 1 money, I would actually get 4 money. So that can become very valuable depending on the value of that red die in each turn. Your turn?
I am going to build a canal for 2.
Wow, okay, that's going to pretty much lock in that I'm not going to be able to build and do anything to catch up. So, okay, so my next turn was going to be discarding a card, a blue card, to play a canal piece, which is another one of the actions. And in this case, it would cost me 1, and I would build my canal. And I was hoping that that would tie me with Mrs. Tox. However, she just built a canal, so it is not going to tie me with Mrs. Tox.
Alright, I'm going to build a blue house.
Alright. And that is the end of the round. So now we would go to verify majorities again. Now, in this case, Mrs. Tox already has the reputation majority, so she doesn't flip it. She keeps that. I haven't surpassed her, so I don't flip mine. She does, however, have 2 canal pieces, and I only have 1, so she gets to flip that one over again. Now again, in the future, I could outpace her and build more. She will never lose that majority, which is really kind of nice. And then finally, there's the people majority. I have 3 people, she has 2, so I actually get that majority and I can flip that over. So she's getting a pretty good advantage on top of me right now. However, I'm slowly building up a strategy to come back. Now, one thing that hasn't come into play too much are the threat tokens. And the threat tokens can get pretty painful. The yellows are raids, which will make you return all of your guilders, all of your money to the bank. And that doesn't matter if you have 1 or if you have 20. The flood is going to return all of your workers back to the supply. And that can get really, really just disastrous depending on how you're piling up your workers. In fact, there's one card in the game that will give you points for workers at the end of the game, and people will start to stockpile them, and then boom, the flood comes in and totally wipes everybody out. The red is the fire, which will remove one of your houses or your canal tokens. That is probably, as bad as fire sounds, the easiest one to deal with because at least you have the option of choosing one of your houses or one of your canal tokens. The pest, which is brown, means that you have to discard one of your people that's in play. And I'll tell you right now, for the most part, everyone plays people that are going to help them from their strategies, so losing a whole person can be really terrible. And then finally, the purple is intrigue, which makes you lose 3 victory points altogether. And that's one of the main reasons that you start on 5 points, is because if intrigue comes up at the very beginning of the game, you can make your way back down all the way down to 0. So the threats, while haven't come into play in the first 2 rounds, can get quite harried later on in the game. And as you can imagine, there's multiple different cards that are going to allow you to get rid of threat markers, both as an action from one of the sidebar actions, but also possibly give threat markers to opponents as well. They're limited, but they're out there. And then finally, you're probably asking, well, when does the game end? Well, the game ends when one of the stacks is out completely. Once one of the stacks is out, you can then continue the round by drawing from this overflow stack. But once again, in a 2-player game, this stack is gigantic. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in our final thoughts. But for now, this has been Bruges.
So that's Bruges. Bruges is simple, yet hard to master. Component-wise, it's beautiful. The artwork on the cards is really well done. The design of the cards, where all the actions are down the banner on the right-hand side, and then the character ability and the picture are on the main area of the card, really well done. It makes it very simple to read and very simple to understand. There's a bit of a learning curve because there's so many different cards in the game, but once you start to realize some of the different effects, when they take effect, when they happen, what to do to make them happen, what to plot and plan for, it becomes a lot more understandable and a lot easier to build strategies once you get familiar with them. But the card stock is beautiful. The board is gorgeous. There's not a lot of interacting with the board outside of the reputation track and the channels, but what it does very well. And while it's colorful and bold, it's not very confusing and you don't get lost in it. So component quality is really, really good. Gameplay mechanics is something a little different and a little interesting. So the base gameplay of building houses, recruiting people, and using their abilities is great. There's a very good balance between the amount of people of different types, the amount of people of different triggers, and what I mean by that is the I guess spacing or mix of the amount of people that have endgame abilities, come into play abilities, triggered abilities, abilities you have to use workers for. All of those are very well spaced and very well balanced. The challenge is that in a 2 or a 4 player game, you have a very, very different amount of cards you're going to see. As you saw in our game, we showed you in a 2 player game, the overflow stack, which are the cards you're not going to primarily use in the game, is very big, and you're going to be limited on the number of cards you have. In a 4 player game, that stack is very small, so you're going to see a vast majority of the cards in a 4 player game. What we have found in a 2 player game, that means is you're more reactionary than proactive, whereas in a 4 player game, you're going to have access to more cards and you can start to build strategies based on what you believe may be coming to you in future rounds. It's not drastically different, but it's different enough to give you a feel of a little faster and a little more streamlined game in a 2 player game that's a little more reactive, but a little more strategic and a little more in depth in a 4 player game. I personally have felt and found that this game works best with 4 players and still complain about the 60-minute time frame that they tell you on the box that it can take. Now in terms of experience, there's some interesting things with this. When you're first playing the game, you're learning all the different characters, the abilities, the threats, the potential negatives. The games are very engaging because you're learning everything, you're working together competitively but kind of cooperatively to understand what each person's strategies are and get a good feel for how these cards and things interact with each other. The challenge is that once you learn those things, what tends to happen is you take your turn, you play your character, you gain your advantage or you gain your actions and abilities, and then you can kind of sit back and wait for each person to take their turn. Now, a lot of people could say that that's exactly what Stefan Feld tries to do with his games. Castles of Burgundy is a very good example of that as well. The majority of action happens on your turn, and you don't necessarily need to pay attention to every single action that someone else does. It's always good and highly advised to, but there are those moments where you may sneak away to an iPhone or an iPad to play something else while the game is in motion. Bruges kind of suffers from the same thing once you become very familiar with the cards. You start to realize this is my strategy, this is what I'm building towards, this is what I'm doing, and on other players' turns, the things you really just have to understand is how good their engine or their strategy is working for them, what cards or characters they've played so that you can get an idea of what's coming next, but primarily you're more concerned about what's happening on your turn. Now that's not necessarily bad. But for me and my play style, I tend to really like it when other people's turns have an impact to me and my strategy and give me that ebb and flow feeling of, okay, I know what my overall strategy is, but now I need to tweak things slightly, possibly because of someone else's move. There's a lot of time in Bruges that just doesn't happen. The other thing that's interesting from an experience is the channels. I thought the channels were going to be a really big part of this game because of the city of Bruges and how it's laid out. Unfortunately, we played games where all of us went after the channels, none of us went after the channels, and then some games where there were a mix of people going after channels and not. And in any of those cases, the channels never really made a big impact to the gameplay. While one person could potentially be spending a lot of time, money, and resources to go build those channels, you as another player could be spending time, money, and resources to do other things from a strategy and still end up just as good. So I thought the channels would have a bigger impact to the game, and unfortunately they didn't. It doesn't necessarily make them bad, but what can happen in sometimes is if you play multiple games of this, if no one goes after channels, it can kind of feel like just an additive where you're not necessarily needing it put into the game. In fact, in most games we have found that building the channels really isn't as exciting. We thought there could have been some extra things put in for bonuses aside from just victory points for building those channels. It's not to say again that it's bad, it's just that it seems to only do it good enough. And that's really what the summary is for Bruges. For me, Bruges is a game that I really like, but I just can't bring myself to love. It's beautiful, it's fun, it's a good time, 2, 3, or 4 players. Again, personally, better with 4 players than 2. But it's something that seems to do a lot of little things really well and connect them all together, but nothing ever really great. So, we're going to give Bruges a hit. It's a fun game. We definitely recommend checking it out. If you're a fan of Stefan Feld, more than likely you will enjoy this game as well. If you like Castles of Burgundy, you very well may like this too. The only downside to this game is, again, there is a lot of randomness with the dice and the amount of cards that you're going to see. But if you have a game group that would allow you to play 4 players more often than not, you'll probably enjoy it very much. We'd love to hear your thoughts. We hope that you've enjoyed this critical review, but feel free to leave your comments below on the YouTube channel. You can of course join in the discussion on Facebook, on Twitter, and Google Plus by searching Crits Happen, or at our homepage at critshappen.com. But until we see you next time, we hope you enjoy all of your channel building, people recruiting, and reputation gaining times inside the beautiful city of Bruges. Thanks so much for watching, keep rolling those dice, and we hope they're all crits.